59. This is the last lecture for period 6. We're talking about continuity and change through the entire period. The learning objective is explain the extent to which industrialization brought change from 1865 to 1898. So we have the same key concepts from the first historical topic of this unit, and starting with technological advances, large-scale production methods, and the opening of new markets encouraged the rise of industrial capitalism in the United States. So some of the changes that we see are the new technologies like the Bessemer process fueling industrialization and those new heavy industries, and the new class of captains of industry and robber barons who are the mega rich who are beginning to prosper through this new capitalist system. Some continuity, we have similarities in how the Hawaii attempts of annexation are similar to previous Western expansion, and similarities to this period of industrialization to a previous period of industrialization in the early 19th century, which was called the Market Revolution. Large-scale industrial production accompanied by massive technological change, expanding international communication networks, and pro-growth government policies generated rapid economic development and business consolidation. So the consolidation that we see, this is the new change. We have vertical and horizontal integration. It begins in the railroad industries and then it moves on to other areas to where you will finish up with trusts in every single industry. Telegraph lines will follow the rail lines that are being put down. And we do have some continuity here. The government subsidies that were used to encourage growth, they also were not trying to regulate these new industries. The government would claim that they were trying to follow a laissez-faire approach whenever it was convenient for the industrialists. And we also have the South continuing to be less developed or industrialized than the North, with some attempts at industrializing it with the New South. That was the essay written by Henry Grady. All right, so a variety of perspectives on the economy and labor developed during a time of financial panics and downturns. So we see the rise of labor unions here, the Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor. They organized strikes. We have the Pullman strike, the Haymarket strike, the Great Railroad strike of 1877. And they tried to get better working conditions, that's higher pay, shorter hours, through collective bargaining, striking, picketing, boycotting. And we have some continuities here in the economy as well. We continue to experience panics, and a lot of them are being caused by overspeculation. Earlier in the century, they were being caused by overspeculation of land. Now they're starting to be caused by overspeculation of stocks on companies like railroads or railroad companies. Farmers continue to experience large debts. They are subject to the prices of the crops that they grow, and they are advocating for inflationary policy. So they want the use of greenbacks or the coinage of silver to make their debt be a lot easier to pay. All right, so new systems of production and transportation enabled consolidation within agriculture, which along with periods of instability, spurred a variety of responses from farmers. So the main response from farmers that we saw in this period was the creation of the Grange and the Farmers Alliance. These are collective groups that are now advocating specifically for farmers. There will be some limited success in passing Granger laws in the West, in parts of the South, but they're going to be limited, and some of them are going to be deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. For continuities, we continue to see that farming becomes more and more mechanized, leading to higher crop yields, which will lead to a falling of prices for crops, hurting farmers and helping consumers. The migrations that accompanied industrialization transformed both urban and rural areas of the United States and caused dramatic social and cultural changes. So the biggest change is this new wave of immigration. People are settling in cities and they're growing faster than before. The immigrant groups are settling in ethnic enclaves like Chinatowns, Little Italies, where they're able to retain some portion of their identity, of their culture, while at the same time beginning to assimilate into American culture. For continuities, we see that Irish immigrants had settled in cities before as the new immigrants were all settling. The Western migration continued, and we have Frederick Jackson Turner's idea that the frontier is closing, that people have settled everywhere that was available to settle, and now we must look elsewhere to continue our push for innovation. All right, international and internal migration increased urban populations and fostered the growth of a new urban culture. So our change here is that the new wave of immigration was coming largely from Southern and Eastern Europe. During the middle of the century, it was coming mostly from Ireland and Germany. We also see the first act of exclusion of an immigrant group with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The nativist sentiment is the same from before, but it had never risen to the level to where a specific group was going to be left out. So larger numbers of migrants moved to the West in search of land and economic opportunity, frequently provoking competition and violent conflict. So this is where we talk about how American expansion into the West is beginning to cause conflict with Native Americans. This is very similar to what was going on before when Americans were expanding, but the biggest change here is that now railroads are making it a lot easier for Americans to get out to the West, sending more settlers and sending U.S. Army troops to protect the settlers at the expense of Native Americans. There are new deposits of precious metals. So in Comstock Lode, there is silver. In the Black Hills, there is gold, and more miners are making their way over there, further displacing Native Americans. And like we said, conflict with Native Americans over land was nothing new. Some of the major battles are the Battle of Little Bighorn and the major legislation that dispossessed Native Americans of a lot of their land was the Dawes Act of 1887. So the Gilded Age produced new cultural and intellectual movements, public reform efforts, and political debates over economic and social policies. So some of the new changes of these movements that we haven't seen before were the conservation movement. We have Yellowstone National Park be the first national park. Social Darwinism, trying to use this pseudoscience to justify racialized thinking. The Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie, in trying to engage with philanthropy. We have women's suffrage, which actually was the continuity. Temperance, also we saw earlier in the century. And populism, that's a big change. Another continuity is African Americans seeking equality. The movement is the same, the desires are the same, but now the people are starting to change, whereas before we had Frederick Douglass be one of the main voices and most visible advocates for equality for African Americans. Now we're moving into a new era with W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and Ida B. Wells. So new cultural and intellectual movements both buttressed and challenged the social order of the Gilded Age. So for changes, this growth of popular culture, people have more disposable time, more disposable income. They are buying newspapers, magazines, in which they're being exposed to the same things. Sports become popular. Baseball is a new spectator sport. People are going to the circus. They're buying a ticket to go see Buffalo Bills Wild West. There's new ideas in architecture, as seen in the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. There are new movements in literature, like the naturalist movement with Jack London's White Fang, or the realist movement with Mark Twain. And finally, for continuities, we have a continued attempt to assimilate Native Americans. And this is done in a slightly different way because now they're being sent to schools with the specific purpose to assimilate Native Americans. The Carlisle School by Pratt, William Henry Pratt, is the main example of these assimilation schools. So dramatic social changes in this period inspired political debates over citizenship, corruption, and the proper relationship between business and government. One of the biggest changes is that we have a settled response from the Supreme Court about birthright citizenship in the court case U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. It says that if someone is born in the United States, regardless of their parents' ancestry or status, they are U.S. citizens. For continuities, patronage had been used since the early 19th century. It's only into the Gilded Age that there is reform attempted. And Jim Crow laws continue against African Americans. They're upheld in Plessy versus Ferguson, creating the doctrine of separate but equal. All right, so here's the recap. Well, this whole lecture was a recap of everything that happened in period 6, so I won't belabor anything too much. Just know that one of the biggest developments in this period is the growth of industrial capitalism, and that was followed by some economic issues like the growing gap between the rich and the poor, the issue or the debate on currency and the gold standard, and the continued panics that plagued the United States from over-speculation. We have the growth of the middle class, growth of consumer culture, new amusements, and the continuity in the treatment of immigrants, Native Americans, and African Americans. All right, so thank you for watching this lecture. Best of luck in your Unit 6 test, and I'll see you back for Unit 7 later on.